There are things you've said lately, maybe to yourself, maybe out loud, that sound like excuses. You know how they land. You've seen the look. And the worst part isn't the judgment from other people. It's that you're not entirely sure they're wrong. Maybe you said, I just can't make myself start. Maybe you said, I don't care about this anymore. About something you used to love. Maybe you canceled something for the third time and told yourself you'd do better next week. And what came back, from someone else or from your own head, was some version of the same word: lazy. This video is about 5 things that burned out people say that get misread as laziness by everyone around them and by themselves. Not to reassure you, to show you, specifically, what each one actually means. Because there's a difference between a character flaw and a depletion signal, and once you can tell them apart, the prescription changes completely. Let's start with how the laziness label forms in the first place, and why it sticks so hard for people who are burning out. Burnout in its high-functioning form doesn't look the way people expect. You're still showing up. You're still delivering, at least enough. The external collapse hasn't happened yet. What's collapsed is interior. And so when the behaviors start, the procrastination, the avoidance, the staring at a task you can't seem to begin, there's no visible explanation for them. You were fine last year. You were, by most accounts, one of the reliable ones. And now you're sitting with an empty inbox and a full to-do list, and you simply cannot make yourself move. From the outside, that looks like a choice. From the inside, it doesn't feel like anything, which is somehow worse. Because a person who is choosing not to work at least has agency. What you have is something closer to a wall that appeared in a place where there used to be a door. The reason the laziness label sticks isn't cruelty, it's that laziness is the only framework most people have for behavior that looks like avoidance but has no obvious cause. When someone who used to function stops functioning and there's no dramatic event to explain it, the gap gets filled with character. And because you can't see the depletion from the outside, you start filling that gap yourself. That's where the real damage happens. Not in the judgment from others, in the moment you started to believe it. So here are 5 things burned out people say that get called laziness, and what each one actually means. 1. I just can't make myself start. This one lands hard, because from the outside, starting looks voluntary. The task is there. You know how to do it. You've done harder things before. And yet you sit there, sometimes for an hour, and nothing happens. What gets said about that, internally or out loud, is that you lack discipline, that you're avoiding discomfort, that you need to just push through. Here's what's actually happening. Chronic overwork depletes the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for initiating action, managing attention, and regulating the emotional response to tasks that feel effortful. When that system is running on empty, starting isn't just hard. It's neurologically expensive in a way it didn't used to be. I can't make myself start is not a motivation problem. It's a resource problem. And you cannot willpower your way out of a resource deficit. 2. I don't care about this anymore. This one frightens people. Because this was something you cared about, a project, a role, sometimes an entire career that used to mean something. And now there's just nothing where the feeling should be. Which gets read as ingratitude, entitlement, apathy. What it actually is has a name: emotional blunting. It's one of the clearest signs of sustained cortisol dysregulation. When the stress response runs for long enough without genuine recovery, the brain begins suppressing the emotional signaling system that makes things feel meaningful. It isn't depression, exactly. It's more like the volume getting turned down on everything. The rewards, the stakes, the sense of purpose, until you're moving through your own life like someone watching it from a slight distance. I don't care about this anymore isn't a character reveal. It's your nervous system telling you it has been running a threat response for so long that it stopped generating the emotional signal that made caring possible. That signal can come back, but not by pushing harder through the numbness. 3. I keep putting off things I actually want to do. This is the one that confuses people the most, including the person experiencing it. It's not the work tasks. It's the things that were supposed to be rest. The book that's been on the nightstand for 3 months. The call with a friend you keep meaning to return. The weekend plan you made with enthusiasm and canceled with relief. If you're too lazy to do the things you enjoy, what does that say about you? Here's what it actually says. Burnout doesn't just affect your capacity for work. It degrades your capacity for everything that requires initiation, including pleasure. The dopaminergic pathways that generate anticipation and reward are the same ones that get suppressed under chronic stress. So the things that should feel appealing don't generate pull, and without pull, starting even something you want requires an act of will your system doesn't currently have available. Avoiding what you want isn't laziness, it's a depleted reward system. And telling yourself to just do it is the wrong tool for a physiological pattern. 4. I can't focus on anything. You used to be able to sit with a problem and think. Now you have 15 tabs open and you're not really in any of them. You read the same paragraph 4 times. You start an email, start something else. The word for this, from the outside, is distracted. Sometimes the word is scattered, sometimes it's not trying. Attention is not infinite. It runs on glucose, sleep quality, and the absence of a background threat signal. When the nervous system is running in low-grade alarm mode, which is exactly what chronic overwork produces, attention narrows. Not because you've chosen to be distracted, because the brain, under sustained threat, allocates resources differently. Focused thinking is expensive. Threat scanning is essential. So the brain prioritizes scanning, and what you experience is the inability to land anywhere. I can't focus is what it sounds like when a system designed for sustained attention has been in threat mode long enough to reorganize around survival rather than performance. It is not a focus problem. It is a safety problem. And safety, not discipline, is what resolves it. 5. I just need things to be easier right now. This one tends to carry the most shame. Because it sounds like surrender, like lowering the bar, like giving up. And in a culture that treats discomfort as virtue, asking for things to be easier reads as weak, especially from someone who used to be the person who made things harder on purpose. Here's what I need things to be easier actually is. It's accurate self-assessment. When the regulatory system is depleted, when cortisol is dysregulated, sleep is fragmented, emotional reserves are low, complexity becomes genuinely harder to process. Cognitively, not metaphorically, the bandwidth is smaller, and asking for conditions that match your current actual capacity is not weakness. It is the opposite of weakness. It is the one honest thing your system has asked of you in months. High functioning doesn't mean fine. And recognizing that you need less right now is not the mask slipping. It's the first accurate thing you've said about where you actually are. Now let's talk about why the laziness label does more than just misname what's happening. It actively makes things worse. Here's what's important to understand about the laziness label. Beyond it being inaccurate, calling this laziness doesn't just get the cause wrong. It prescribes the exact opposite of what actually helps. Because if the problem is laziness, the solution is effort. Push harder, care more, find motivation, build discipline, which is precisely the set of instructions that accelerates a depleted nervous system's collapse. Every time someone in burnout accepts the laziness frame and responds by trying harder, the system depletes faster. The behaviors get worse. The shame compounds. And because the prescribed solution isn't working, the conclusion isn't wrong prescription. The conclusion is, I'm more broken than I thought. This is the loop that keeps people stuck. Not for weeks, but for years. Not because they're weak. Because they were handed a framework that was never designed to describe what's actually happening. Research on burnout recovery consistently shows that the behaviors most commonly misread as laziness, avoidance, reduced output, emotional withdrawal, are not character failures being revealed under pressure. They are protective responses from a nervous system that has been running a threat response for longer than the human body was designed to sustain. Calling it laziness doesn't motivate. It activates the same threat response that caused the collapse. And that's not your fault. It's the natural result of using a framework that was built for a different problem entirely. The moment the label changes, even slightly, something else becomes possible. Not recovery. Not yet. Just the beginning of a more accurate map. If any of the 5 things in this video landed, if you recognized a sentence you've said and weren't sure what to do with it, there's a short assessment in the description built for exactly this moment. 5 minutes. Honest. No clinical jargon. It gives you a clear picture of where you actually sit on the burnout spectrum and what that means specifically for your situation. Link is in the description. So what do you do with this? Not a recovery plan. Not a system. One thing, because one thing is what's actually available right now. The next time one of these sentences comes up in your own head or in a conversation, notice which label is about to attach to it. And before that label lands, ask a different question. Not, why am I so lazy, but what is this telling me about where my system actually is? That question doesn't fix anything immediately. But it interrupts the loop. It replaces the prescription of try harder with the beginning of a more accurate read. And here's why that matters. The label you apply to these behaviors determines what you do next. Laziness prescribes effort, which depletes further. Depletion prescribes something different, something smaller, something that doesn't require performing recovery the same way you performed productivity. The internal objection most people have at this point is, okay, but knowing it's burnout doesn't actually change anything. I still have to show up. I still have the same job, the same responsibilities. That's true. Knowing this doesn't change the external conditions. What it changes is the inner one. The difference between walking into your week, believing you're failing because you're fundamentally flawed, and walking in knowing you're depleted and your system is doing exactly what depleted systems do is not small. One of those people is trying to fix a character flaw. The other is managing a physiological state. And only one of those is actually solvable. You don't have to have a plan today. You don't have to start a recovery routine. You are allowed to simply know this. To carry a more accurate name for what's happening and let that be enough for right now. Not yet is a complete sentence. If you want to go further than this video can take you, the 5-minute assessment in the description will tell you clearly where you are and what that means. Link is also in the pinned comment. Which of the 5 sentences have you said and what did you tell yourself it meant? You came into this video carrying a word. Lazy. Maybe someone handed it to you. Maybe you handed it to yourself. Either way, you'd been holding it long enough that it was starting to feel like a fact. It isn't a fact. It's a framework. And frameworks can be replaced when a more accurate one becomes available. What's actually been happening in the procrastination, the avoidance, the flattened caring, the inability to start or focus or want the things you used to want is not a revelation of who you are. It is what sustained depletion does to a human nervous system. Predictably. Mechanically. Without moral content. The people who burned out before you and found their way back didn't do it by accepting the laziness diagnosis and trying harder. They did it by getting a more accurate map and then taking the one next step the map made visible. That's all that's being asked of you today. Not a system, not a plan, not a version of recovery that looks like another performance. Just a different word for what you're carrying. A word that points towards something you can actually work with. You didn't choose this. You were running on a system designed to extract until it broke. And it broke in the specific, quiet, invisible way that high-functioning systems break. Nothing about that is your fault. Nothing about it makes you less capable than you were. And right now, with no audience and no grade and no requirement to have done anything at all before this moment, you are allowed to set down the word that never fit. You don't have to replace it with a solution. Just with something closer to the truth. One small thing. No audience. That's the whole thing.